the word masculinity is something that I really struggle with. It be toxic masculinity, positive masculinity, healthy masculinity, whatever it is. I think whenever we speak about masculinity, what we do is we still give men a strict narrative.
I think a lot of the conversation is necessary and long overdue. But I also think some of it misses the mark. Well, actually, a lot of it misses the mark because it focuses on what's wrong with men without offering a vision of what healthy looks like, you know? And so you can't just tear something down without building something in its place. Yeah. And for a lot of men, especially young men, you know, they're hearing that who they are is a problem, that their instincts are dangerous. And rather than growing, they either shut down or they swing hard the other way, you know, toward these online voices that tell them often that strength means dominance. Neither of those things are the answer. And so the men I know who are doing the work, they're not less masculine, they're more themselves.
Yes. G'day, I'm Luke Bateman, and this is In the Good Books. Today, I have an incredible guest to speak to. His name is Matt Brown, and his book, along with his mission and movement, is called Is Not Your Rehab. And we will talk about all about that during the interview today. But he is a man who has overcome a childhood that felt unsafe, a very traumatized childhood where domestic violence was a massive part of his story and a part of his parents' relationship. But he made a decision as a young man to leave that situation and break that pattern and undertake a journey of healing for himself that he is now sharing with all of us through his work and through his writing. In the process, he served as an example and created a safe space for other men to do the same in what is a bit of an unlikely place, a barbershop, but probably not that unlikely when, as men, when we understand the spaces that we feel comfortable to talk in. And he'll talk about why he thinks that is the perfect place for it. He has such beautiful, grounded, vulnerable views on courage and male vulnerability, male strength, and sharing his story. And of course, on the power of writing and the power of books and the power of narrative. He's someone that I deeply admire. He's someone who's helped immensely in my own journey. He's someone who's been a role model for me and been a teacher to me in my own healing journey and my own growth. Matt, it's a pleasure and a privilege to have you here, mate.
Thank you, Luke, brother. Pleasure. Absolute honor.
Nah, mate, the pleasure's all mine. Obviously, we met each other through social media, and that's how I came to find you, and it's how I came to find your book, and it's how I came to find your story. So, first of all, we'll begin by starting with you, mate. Like, tell us about, for my listeners who don't know you, tell me about your upbringing, tell me where you grew up. Give me the Matt Brown origin story, please.
Man, thank you, bro, for having me. So I'm of Samoan descent, but I was born and raised here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. South Auckland to be exact, but raised in Christchurch, where I will consider the greatest rugby city in the world, home of the Crusaders. But yeah, growing up, I mean, I would say a typical Kiwi bloke, but I grew up in a lot of family violence. And so that's kind of been my story. That's kind of what I've shared. But I suppose I found myself sharing it from a young age, but more evidently in my adult years when I opened up a barbershop. And so it was from this type of place where men came to look good, feel good, where I started sharing my story openly to the men who frequented my barbershop. And so this movement, we started an anti-violence, family violence movement from our barbershop called Is Not Your Rehab. So that's in a nutshell.
You obviously came from a very traumatic home, and you left home when you were 16, am I right?
15.
Left home when you were 15, you went out working on your own. What drove you to make that decision? Like how tough was that decision at that time?
Bro, it was scary as hell. Like, you know, even I'm 40, I just turned 40. And so even to think back to when I was 15, man, like obviously home must have been that horrific, scary for a 15-year-old boy to leave, you know. And this is all I knew. All I ever knew was violence. All I ever knew was chaos. And so to leave that home, I remember the first night away from home, I felt so disjointed and just obviously not at home. I wanted to go back home. But home was so bad and so volatile that I had no other option. Well, the other option was to take my own life or leave home. And so I left that environment and haven't looked back, really.
And you've just gone from strength to strength since then, mate. And we'll get into your book. Like, the name of your book is She Is Not Your Rehab. And can you break that meaning down for us? Like, I want to talk about your past, but I think it's probably important that we talk about your book first so that we get an understanding of how you came to create that book and write that book and publish that book and spread that message with the world.
Man, like many of us men, so many of us men walk around with a lifetime of unresolved pain, right?
Yeah.
And so childhood trauma, abandonment, abuse, shame, and what do? Without even realizing it, we find a woman and we begin to dump that pain onto her. We expect her to fix us, to carry us, to be our emotional rehabilitation center. And the tragedy is that so many good women try. They try at the expense of their own well-being, their own healing, their own lives, and it doesn't work. It can't work. I've seen it with my own eyes, because the healing that needs to happen inside every single one of us men is the work that only we can do ourselves. Many men use her, for generations, even if we don't know that using her is hurting her, And so for me, the title, She Is Not Your Rehab, was kind of like a boundary, a truth. She is not your rehab. And the invitation underneath that slogan is to really encourage men to take responsibility for their own healing.
Yeah. And what led you, and how did you get to that own point yourself? Like, what led you to going, this is a book that I need to write. This is a book that I want to share with the world. Obviously, you've done a lot of your own healing, and then you felt compelled yourself to share that message and share that journey with the world.
It was just from authentic, organic conversations I was having with the bros in my barbershop, and listening to the men's pain and hearing their stories. Some of them came from homes similar to me, some of them didn't. But underneath it all of us were carrying the same weight of so much unprocessed pain. And I think when I started hearing us men, like a lot of us men weren't opening up to our boys or our friends, or when we would open up, it was always, after a drink or two. But often I'd always see the person on the end of that stick was our partners, our children. And so, it just organically grew from these conversations. And so I thought, man, how can I help and serve the men who are sitting in my chair, the men in my community, the men in my neighborhood? How can I be of best service to them? And so, it started from my own story, like owning my own story, doing the work myself, checking my ass into therapy, having these conversations with, wiser and older people, where this kind of organically grew.
And what was your journey in healing? Because this is something that's really important to me as well. I've been through my own healing journey, and I've had to dissect the own painful parts of myself and my own life. And, I went through addiction, I went through rehab, recovery, 12-step programs, so it's something that's really, really important to me. And it's the same thing as you, and I probably noticed it in a different way myself, but it's the same with you, where you just start to see all the men around you and they have the same pain and the same story, and it might not be in the exact same shape or form, but at its root, it's the exact same pain. So what was it about your barbershop, do you think? Like, what is it about? What is it about going to a barber and sitting down in a chair? What do you think that space allowed men to open up to you?
I mean, in a simple nutshell, I think we're cheap therapists, us barbers, hairdressers. But honestly, for me personally, I just never flinched. When a guy sat in my chair and started talking about something real, something painful, I didn't change the subject. I didn't want to make it weird. I just stayed present with him. And I think a lot of men have had the experience of trying to open up and having it go badly, people not knowing what to do with it, and so they learn to keep it in. To me, the barbershop has this unique thing going for it. You're side by side with a man, not face to face. If you are looking at him in the face, you're often looking at the mirror. And so for me, looking at the back of his head, there's something about that angle that makes it easier to say the hard things.
Yeah.
And the chair, it's his space. I'm serving him. There's no power imbalance pushing against him. But really, it started with me being honest, being honest about my own story first. When men know that you've been through something, you're not ashamed of it, they start to feel like, hey, maybe I don't have to be ashamed of my own pain.
And do you think, was it you who initiated that honesty?
100%. When you're vulnerable with your story, you give permission for other men to be vulnerable with their own stories. And I've learned, I learned underneath all these different stories from the bros who were sitting in my chair, all the different circumstances, it was always the same thing. All speaking the same language. I don't feel seen. I feel alone in this. I don't know how to ask for help. I don't know if anyone will care if I did open up, and pain. So much unprocessed pain that men had been carrying for decades. Pains from childhoods that broke them before they even had the language to describe what was happening to them. And then they grew up with that pain and it just went underground, and it started coming out sideways, like you said, through addiction, rage, violence, shutting down completely. And the other thing I keep hearing was how much men love the woman in their lives, how desperately they wanted, to be better for them, but they just didn't know how. And so I thought, I'm in a beautiful relationship, I'm doing the best I can with the tools that I have. How about I model what that looks like to the men who are sitting in my chair?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that that's so, like, it hits so hard with me because, as you said, even through my journey with addiction and my relationship with the women in my life, and it was always like my mother and my sister and my partner for a time, and you love them so much, but you were causing so much pain to them. And for me, that was something that was so difficult and something that I've really worked through myself personally and then that was a great teacher for me in sort of my views on, I would suppose, in like gender and masculinity and how men show up in the world is because, I've said this many times, during my addiction, it was the women in my life who showed up for me. It wasn't the men, and it was the women who came to support and it was the women who came to help. Like my mum showed up every single day for me. And I was I was involved in football. Like I was surrounded by men the entire time. Like I had hundreds of men surrounding me, and the person who kept showing up every single day were the women. And I think that that for me just shapes, like reflection upon that really shapes my view of the world, and it's really given me an indicator and a path for healing, and also just where we need to do work as men. And that's why I resonated so deeply with your book. And, you speak a lot about healing, like men's healing and also men's pain. And I think that, I love speaking about men's pain because I think men's pain is something that we don't speak about very often, and we sort of disregard at times. Because, I think because men have been very oppressive for a long time, space for their healing and space for their pain sort of gets diminished, and it's a bit unwelcome at times. It's like, well, you have no, like, what right do you have to feel pain or to have sort of needs when you've been the ones who've been so harmful for so long. And I think that you open up a beautiful space for men's pain and men's healing. And when we talk about, men's healing and just healing in self, what does healing mean to you? Like where does the work need to begin for us?
What is healing to me? Well, healing to me is not a finished state, and I want to be really clear about that, because I think people get discouraged when they realize healing isn't a destination you arrive at when you're done, and so healing to me is a daily practice. It's a way of living. It's choosing every day to be honest, to be completely honest with what's going on inside you, to sit with the pain rather than numb it or project it, to take responsibility for your feelings rather than, making other people responsible for them. And, what it looks like is different for every man. For me, it looked like learning how to keep small promises to myself. And I talk about that in the book, maybe just drinking 3 liters of water a day. Some no without explaining, having to explain myself, learning to receive love without flinching. These sound like small things, but for a man who grew up where I grew up, they were revolutionary.
Yeah.
And so the benchmark I always try and use is simple. Are my children safe with me? Are the people I love better because I'm in their lives? Am I growing? If yes, then healing's absolutely happening. And to me, that's healing.
I love what you said about healing. It's not a finished state. And you talk about that in your book. And it is that showing up every single day. And there's never going to be a place where you go, okay, I'm done. I'm healed. Like I'm finished. We don't need to do we don't need to do any more. What I loved about Is Not Your Rehab is it made it so simple. It really broke that down and made it a very simple thing to understand. And you put it into really simple terms. And as you said, it was drinking 3 liters of water, 3 liters of water a day. And that's something else that I've, in my own journey, when I very first started, I remember I read this story, and it was from a different book actually, a book about healing, and it said, there was this woman and she made a promise to herself to drink a glass of water every morning, and that was the promise that she made to herself, and then she did that, for 30 days. And then after 30 days, she was like, wow, as you said, like those little promises to yourself, like I didn't break that. Look at what I've done. I've drank 30 glasses of water, and I'm like, what else can I do? And then you start building up those little promises to yourself, and you build that trust in yourself, and you build that new relationship with yourself. Because I think that the issue is it's never the relationship that we have with others. It's always the relationship that we have with ourselves. And men aren't given the tools or the ability or the learning or the knowledge on how to have that relationship with themselves. We are taught to be, we're conditioned by capitalism and patriarchy, and we're taught to be tools of productivity, not humans of emotion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and your book was just so wonderful in giving men the permission to say, hey, you're a human with emotions. That doesn't, and you also you said, that doesn't excuse you of responsibility. That doesn't excuse you of accountability. That doesn't excuse you of ownership. But what it does is it gives you a place to go, okay, I can hold these two truths at the same time. I am damaged and I am hurt, but there is also, and I need to take responsibility of that, but I also have the space and the permission to do that. And I thought that was, you're so wonderful at doing that. And I truly commend you for that, because it's incredible, mate. I want to talk to you about the current state. Like masculinity is something that, the word masculinity is something that I really struggle with. I think that when we talk about masculinity, whether it be toxic masculinity, positive masculinity, healthy masculinity, whatever it is, I think whenever we speak about masculinity, what we do is we still give men a strict narrative. And even if you say, this is healthily masculine, you're still telling men that they need to be men. You say, okay, we've got this new version of manhood for you. Like the old version of manhood didn't work. Now we've got this new version of manhood for you. But I think you still say to people, you still have to be a man. It's still like, we still need you to fit to this narrative. And for me, I think, and what it does is it puts femininity as less than or second to. When you're telling men that they need to be masculine, it says that femininity is second to masculinity. And I find that so harmful to men, because it doesn't allow themselves to express themselves fully, as human beings. So the current conversation around masculinity, what does it mean to you, and what do you see as the problems with it, if any, that is, I suppose?
This is a big topic, brother.
Sorry, mate. I could talk to you for hours, Matty.
No, I can talk about this stuff
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Look, I think a lot of the conversation is necessary and long overdue. But I also think some of it misses the mark. Well, actually, a lot of it misses the mark, because it focuses on what's wrong with men without offering a vision of what healthy looks like, And so you can't just tear something down without building something in its place. And for a lot of men, especially young men, they're hearing that who they are is a problem, that their instincts are dangerous. And rather than growing, they either shut down or they swing hard the other way, toward these online voices that tell them often that strength means dominance. Neither of those things are the answer. And so the men I know who are doing the work, they're not less masculine, they're more themselves.
Yes.
More grounded, more present, more capable of real love. That's the version of masculinity that I want to talk about.
Yes. Oh, I could not agree more.
Yeah, I mean, my own personal definition can mean completely different to another brother's definition of what masculinity is. But to me, I would love to see men who have the courage to face themselves, men who take responsibility for what he carries and how it affects the people around him, men who show up, for his partner, for his kids, for his community with consistency and honesty. Strength to me is not the absence of emotion. Strength is the capacity to feel and still choose well, to be angry and not destroy something, to be afraid and still move forward, to be soft with the people who need your softness. Like what you see, multiple things can be true. I've met some of the most toughest men that you'll ever meet, in my barbershop, in prisons, on construction sites, in therapy groups, men who have been through things that most people, can't even imagine. And the bravest thing every single one of them did was sit in my chair, sit in front of me and tell the truth about their pain. And so to me, that's masculinity. And that's what I want my son to be.
Oh, everything you said just then is so spot on. I cannot tell you how important everything you said just then is. Wow, that's really blown me away. I really appreciate that. Oh yeah, well, we could talk about this for hours, but this is a book podcast after all. I want to get into books and writing and your journey, your journey with books and your journey with writing, because it's something that I'm deeply passionate about. It's something that it's actually a big part of my healing. It was books and writing are huge parts of my own healing. So this is very important to me. So I just want to ask you, what role have books had in your life?
Honestly, first and foremost, bro, I just want to give kudos to you as a man, as a brother who has really owned that space and owning your story and talking about your books. Like, I think it's so beautiful to have witnessed, you and your journey online, just sharing and being so authentic with books. It's been such a beautiful thing. And for me, even watching on this side of across the ditch, I've been encouraged to now lean into the book journey more, just from watching you. So kudos to you, bro.
No, thank you, Matty.
Thank you for modeling that.
Yeah, thank you.
But to answer your question, also, honestly, books saved my life. Like, it sounds dramatic, but I've heard you say before, that they're a different window to life, I wouldn't call myself a natural scholar. I grew up in survival mode, not in an environment that valued sitting down with a book. But at some point in my adult life, as I got older, when I started actively seeking healing, books became my teachers. I leaned on the teachings of Brene Brown, Father Richard Rohr, Gary Chapman, Gabor Mate, like all these guys who were, amazing teachers and so much investment into their knowledge of work. These people handed me language that for things I'd experienced but had never been able to name it. And so when you finally have the words for what's living inside you, that changes everything. And so you go from feeling like something is wrong with you to now understanding what happened to you. And so that shift was enormous, and that's what books mean to me.
Yeah. No, I think you need to be the host of the book podcast, mate. That was beautiful. I was about to ask you what role books have in making us better people, but you've literally you've answered that. I think, and that's why the message and as you said, like when you say books saved my life, and then you think that might sound a bit over the top, but not even in the slightest. Like that's what I say all the time. Like, books saved my life. And I hear people say to me all the time, we hear it on this podcast, books saved my life, books changed my life. And and that's what's so important to me, because when you see the numbers declining in reading and literacy skills, if I couldn't read, if you couldn't read, if we did not have access to books, one of us or both of us might not be sitting here having this conversation. And I think that's why, and that's why books are so important. And your book, of course, is one of those books, that will help save men's lives. And you and Sarah raised enough money to print copies for every inmate in New Zealand prisons. Why was that so important for you? Why did you want your book, and you did it yourself, to be in prisons with inmates?
Because those men are often written off. Society looks at a man in prison and sees him a criminal, a monster. I look at him and see a little boy who never got what he needed, who was let down long before he let anyone else down. And so, even the research is clear. The vast majority of men in prison have experienced significant childhood trauma. They're not monsters. They're men in immense unaddressed pain. And if we can reach them with something that speaks to that, that's tangible, that says, I see you, I know where this started, this is a way through, then we're not just helping them, we're protecting every person that they'll go back out to when they're released. Their partners, their kids, communities. So to me, that's the most important thing. And I say that from a personal level because I was the kid at home. Every time my dad did a long leg in prison for beating up my mother, I was always praying and wishing that when Dad got out, that he would stop the violence, that the violence would stop. That someone will say something to my father while he was inside. Unfortunately, that day never came. And so the dream of getting this book into every person incarcerated in New Zealand was a dream come true. We raised enough money to gift 9,350 books to people in prison. So
yeah, mate, it's incredible. And I think that and there's a little Matt Brown out there whose father will come home a changed man because he's read your book in prison. So you will give young boys the ability to have something that you never got to have, which I think is incredible, mate.
Thank you, bro.
When we talk about writing, writing for me, and I'm sure that this will bring up a lot of emotion, but writing for me is very much, it's a very emotional undertaking, and it really is an excavation. Even I'm writing fantasy, but a lot of the themes, a lot of the wisdoms, a lot of the lessons that I put in are, excavations of my own past and my own pain in many ways. So for you, when you were writing, She's Not Rehab, because I know that obviously it was very, you had to go back into your childhood and your past and really write that down. How was that for you? How was that process for you?
Brother, it was freaking hard. It was so hard. Like, there were things I thought I had dealt with that turned out I hadn't fully faced yet, Writing forces a level of honesty that's different from talking about something. And so when you write it down, it stares back at you and you can't gloss over it, But there was something deeply healing about it too, giving those experiences a shape, a place, a beginning and an end, taking them out of the darkness inside me and bringing them into the light. And so in some ways, writing the book was one of the most significant parts of my healing.
Yeah.
Even doing, my wife is extraordinary, right? My wife is the writer. She's the author. She's the writer more than I am. She's a book nerd. When I first met her and I asked her, how many books have you read, in your lifetime? She said, lifetime, I don't know, but my record when I was young, I would read at least 36 books a week. I'm like, 36 books a week?
30. Oh, yeah.
Trying to get into an argument with a woman who's that clued up. I'm never going to win, right? And so, like, kudos to my wife is extraordinary, and so writing this book together required an extraordinary level of trust from both of us, and so she helped find the words for things I knew in my gut but couldn't always articulate. She would hear me talk about something and reflect back to me in language, exactly what I was trying to say, and so she made the book much, much cleaner, clearer than I could have made it alone. But it was also so intense, because she knows every story of mine. she would come back and go, babe, do you want to talk about this? And I'm like, hell no, I'm putting that up for everyone to but I was self, and women have this beautiful gift of extracting or drawing out the best in us, right? And so I would sit with, that question, ponder on it, and I ended up sharing it on the book, which was one of the hardest stories to share. In one of the chapters, She Is Not Your Shame, which is chapter 3, I think, or 5, I can't remember. I have to pick it back up. But that embarrassing, humiliating story that I chose to share with the world has now been the most powerful story. Like, I have men writing to me who, who struggled with their own bodies, their own abuse, saying that their story, made this little boy feel seen. Yeah.
And when you talk about your wife, you obviously, you wrote that, you wrote it with her. And you had to share those deeply personal stories. And did that change the way that you saw yourself? Did that change the way that you saw your own story through her eyes?
100%. I came out the other side with more compassion for myself. And that sounds like a small thing, but it isn't. I spent a lot of my life being ashamed of where I came from, of who I was, of my upbringing, my parents, the abuse, all of it. Writing it all down, honestly, without flinching, and then choosing to share it with the world, that did something to me. But I think having someone who sees you, who loves you despite, all your flaws and all the things that you don't love about yourself, having your wife, your best friend love you beyond that, it gave me the confidence. Like, I wouldn't have been able to put the story out there, because knowing that the world's going to critique you, people may cancel you, all those things, people may hate your perspective on, family violence prevention, all those things you're open for, open yourself up for, knowing that my wife loves me despite, that, or what could come, was just like, that's all I need.
Isn't it? I had this conversation with someone the other day, and I said, having one person support you, it changes everything. As soon as one person says, I've got you, or you can do this, it changes everything. So I love that. And you've said a number of times during this interview, you've said don't flinch. And that is something that I tell myself all the time when I'm writing, because I saw this one video, and I can't remember which author it was, and they said, my best advice when you're writing, he said, if you're going to write something, don't flinch. And every time I sit down to write, I always say to myself before I start, don't flinch, just back yourself. So I love that you say that. Now you've also written a children's book as well, which is called This Is Not Yours to Carry. Now tell us about that book. And obviously it's a lot different from She Is Not Your Rehab.
Yeah, brother. It's our children's book, This Is Not Yours to Carry. It's speaking directly to the children who are growing up the way I grew up. Children who are carrying the weight of their parents' pain, who feel somehow responsible for the violence, the sadness, the chaos in their home. Children who have taken on the burden that was never theirs to carry in the first place. And so we wanted to write this for children who are sitting in fear right now in a house that doesn't feel safe, to know this is not your fault. This is not yours to carry. But that came around, the idea of that was, my wife was sitting on this couch with me, and she asked me, what's something you wish that an adult said to you as you were going through all the, women's refuge shelters with your mother? What's something you wish someone said to you? And I said, hand on heart, without a split of a second, I said, I wish someone said to me that this was never ours to carry, because me and my siblings, we thought it was our job to keep the house tidy so Dad wouldn't get angry. It was our job to make sure everything was, set just how Dad liked it, just so he wouldn't get angry and then abuse Mum. And if he did do that and he wasn't happy, it was our fault, And so it was, I think I cried more reading the children's book than I did She Is Not Your Rehab. Because I just think this is the book I wish I had, times, and I'm just so glad that now kids around the country, around the world, are holding this, tangible book in their hands and reading.
I want to talk to you about one thing in it, and if it's fine if you don't want to go there, but my mum, the relationship that I have with my mum is incredible. Wouldn't be here without my mum. As I said to you, my mum was the one who carried me through addiction, carried me through rehab. She showed up with me every day. I know you spoke, it was something that when I read She Is Not Your Rehab, when you spoke of your mother and you spoke of your relationship with your mother and, all the pain that she went through, that was something that really deeply affected me. And I just want to ask you about your relationship with your mum. And I know that she's no longer with us. I'm sorry for that, because it's something that I think about all the time, because if it's something that I think about when my mum not being here, I can't wrap my head around that world. And it's something that I fear. It's something that scares me daily, not having my mum with me. So I just wanted to, if you're okay with it, Matty, I just want to talk to you. Yeah, I just want to talk to you about, the role that your mum played in your life, the relationship you had with her, and how you've navigated life without her.
It's losing my mother will undoubtedly be the hardest thing I've had to face up to date. More than the abuse I've had to endure, more than doing the work. I think losing your mother, the first woman that you ever loved, was the hardest thing for me. And I think it was, grief is a bitch. There's no other way to put it, but grief is a bitch. And I think what grief presented to me was the powerlessness that little Matt had as a kid. I didn't have the tools or the strength or, the wisdom or the resources to help my mum, watching her, be subjected to this violence. And so that all came to the surface when I lost my mum. But then all the beautiful things came to the surface too, the things to celebrate. My mum was the most, we could talk to her about anything. And that's a gift that I will forever hold sacred as a parent now, trying to create that space for my children, my tamariki, my little kids, is that they can talk to me about anything. I could talk to my mum about anything, about girl issues, my thoughts, what I was struggling with internally, and she would always listen. If you've read my book and you've listened to me on other podcasts, my mum is one of the people who, unfortunately abused us. How I viewed it, you stayed in a relationship with a man who chose to do this. But I have to have compassion for her. She came to New Zealand from the islands without much. She grew up in a society where there was a lot of racism. She lived in the dawn raids in New Zealand when Polynesians were being shipped back to the islands after, settling here in New Zealand. All these things, and then falling in love with a man who didn't have the language to help, address his pain, or, it wasn't even accessible in the 70s, 80s, 90s to even talk about this stuff. And so I take all of that, I hold all of that information in my head, and I think, how do I move forward to be the best father for my children? It's not having resentment or anger towards my mother, because when I look at the big picture, my mum did the best with what she had, with what she knew in the time that she was living in. Yes, I don't agree with everything that she did, but she was the best mother, the only mother I had, and the best one that I had. And so our relationship was beautiful. Like, I love her. I miss her to bits. I get emotional. I even get emotional when I see you on socials with your mum, bro, because I think it's just so beautiful. A lot of us men are mama's boys,
Yeah.
And so I miss her counsel. For a while there, for the first year, I would ring up and just listen to her answer machine, her voice, just things like that. And so, yeah, I'll forever be grateful for my mum. She's the reason why I do this work. I don't want to see other women be rehab centers. My mum was a rehab center for my father my entire childhood. She did everything she could with the tools that she had to try and make him happy, and that came at a cost. That cost her. It cost us, our kids. And so I just thought, nah, this shit stops with me. And so I try and honor my mum the best I can by speaking the truth. It wasn't all, glamorous and pretty flowers and all that. We had our ups and downs, as I share in the book, but I I miss her dearly, and I wish, and I believe that she's watching over me and her grandbabies, but I wish she was here to see the movement that her pain kind of, started.
Yeah, all the impact and the positive impact and the healing that came from her pain, I suppose. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with me, Matty. I really do appreciate that, mate. I think when, the two things that I want to touch on that you said, she was doing the best she could with what she had. I think that's something that's been a big part of my own journey when I look back at my addiction and a dark season of my life, and I have to have compassion for that Luke and say, that Luke he was doing terribly, but he was doing the best that he had.
Mm.
We'll finish it off on a lighter note, but thank you for such a wonderful, touching, vulnerable conversation, man. I really, these conversations like this heal me. This, the last 45 minutes has healed me, mate. So I appreciate that. But yes, we'll finish on a light note. So our final question for whenever we have someone on the In the Good Books podcast is, what is your good book, your most loved book, the one book that you would say that you would recommend to people? And I know as a book lover, when someone asks you what's your favorite book, how can I define that down to one? How can I sum it down to one? But if you had to choose just one, what is Matt Brown's good book?
I'll choose one that lines up with my work. Okay. The first one that comes to my mind is, and this is one that cracked the door open for me. Was Brene Brown's Daring Greatly.
Yeah.
And I jokingly call her my white mama because we have the same last name.
You said that in your book. Yeah, I love in your book when you're like, my white mama, Brene Brown.
But when I first encountered her work on vulnerability and shame, it was like someone had handed me a new language for my entire life. I had experienced shame so deeply, worn it like a second skin, but I had never had a word for it or an understanding of what it was doing to me. And so that book really changed the way I did everything. And yes, she's from America, she's Texan, all these things. And I thought, how do I simplify this language and make it relatable to the boys in my neighborhood, And so it really shaped the way I work with men, the way I showed up in my marriage as a father, as a papa to my kids, the way I parented. If you haven't read it, I strongly encourage you to read it.
I actually have not read any Brene Brown. I know she is, like, I'm across her work, but I've never actually read it. So Brene Brown, Daring Greatly. That is the next. I'll read it in the next week or two. I promise.
I thought you ought to read it. So it's good that I listed a book that you haven't read.
No, yeah. Mate, you're giving me a book. No, I love it. But you also mentioned Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr is someone who I've read much of his work. I love Richard Rohr. I think he's an incredible teacher. So what next for Matt Brown? What's the future like? What are you continuing to do, man? Obviously, you continue to do your work and everything like that. But what's coming up for you?
Man, I'm not often home much. If I come back to New Zealand, I'm here to sleep. But my wife and I, we do work globally now. So I speak all around the world. I work in reservations and around the world in the Indigenous communities over there in Australia. We're doing a lot of advising with government and organisations just to how to work better with men, because what we currently have, the whole punitive way of working with men and punishing them, when you understand brain science and trauma informed, like all these things, how we can work better with men to create a violence-free world. And so, we've got more books on the way. Our first children's book, This Is Not Yours to Carry, is one of 10. These 10 books, because people for years have asked us, have you guys got any messaging or work books for children? And I've kind of always tried to stay away from children. Then obviously as I grew in my knowledge and did more of the work on myself and healed and researched, we really need to be framing and giving language to little boys before they turn into men who don't know how to, process or regulate their emotions. And so these 10 children's books are based on adverse childhood experiences. So kids who suffer with, traumatic things like family violence, addiction, suicide, all these hard topics that adults struggle to converse, talk to children about. And so, that's one of our projects we're working on. My wife is in the pipeline of writing 3 books. She's writing the follow-on to Is Not Your Rehab, titled I Am Not Your Rehab. And so, we have so many projects in the pipeline.
Oh, that's awesome. Matty, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for just being a truly vulnerable man, a wonderful man, and someone who I deeply admire and respect. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Lukey.
I can't thank you enough for joining me on this episode of In the Good Books. This was probably my favourite episode so far, but don't tell my mum that. Although she's listening, sorry, Mum. Is there someone that you think would get something out of this conversation? I'm sure that there would be people, especially men and women, who would get something out of this conversation that I had with Matt today. I'd love for you to share it with them. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. Find me on socials in the show notes and keep those voice notes coming via the email goodbooks@9.com.au. You never know who we will be talking to next, so make sure you subscribe to In the Good Books. I look forward to the next chapter.